Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody. Very happy to be here this week. And this week, I'm going to do something. I've done this in the past where I take what I call historically important videos and show them. This one is from 2004. It's me talking at the International UFO Congress. And I was going to play this many months ago, but just for, let's say, political reasons, things that were going on at the time, I postponed it. But it's a talk that I gave, and the title of the talk is Electric Highways to the Stars. And unfortunately, it got derailed because of commentary and audience questions about the Apollo lunar landing. And this is actually really disgusting because... and I'll insert this right now, a couple of items. But before I do that, I have a couple quick announcements. This Thursday evening, so this would be midnight Central Time or 1 in the morning Eastern Time, I'll be the main guest on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, talking about the physics of this comet 3I Atlas and the psyops that goes with it. By the way, I have a new book that's out. Here's a photograph of the cover of the book. It's available on my webpage. It's called The Physics of 3I Atlas with an addendum. The addendum is False Flag Alien Invasion, psyops to bring in the New World Order. So this is a book that's important, but it gives the physics of what's going on with 3I Atlas, so you'll understand. Anyway, it's complicated, and so that book is available on my webpage. It'll be available on Amazon here shortly. And go to my webpage, jmccsci.com, and you can get the ebook at this point. In a couple of days, the print version will be available on Amazon in my library. You could just search McCanney, my name McCanney, and Amazon, and library. Put those three words in, the library will come up, and in a few days that book will be posted there also. But like I say, the ebook is available currently on my webpage. Excuse me. Go to the product, go to education at the top of the page. There's the menu. Go to education. The drop-down menu will be CDs and books, etc. And it's the individual ebooks that you're looking for. There's 4 categories. They're like blue lines there. Look for the one that says individual ebooks, and it's the very first one. Okay, enough of that. And so last night I was a guest again many, many times on Jeff Rent's show and talking about the 3I Atlas issue. So I'm not going to do a lot of that tonight. What sparked my interest in showing the video tonight, which, like I say, goes a bit into the Apollo lunar landing, and it's really, like I say, very disgusting that the public has to talk about this. But what brought this on is this week, this is crazy. This is really crazy. Kim Kardashian. Now, I imagine most of you would know who she is. She is a, social media, worldwide known for her, I'm sure she has product lines, and she's made a lot of money being Kim Kardashian. And so anyway, she writes a letter to NASA. I mean, this is, like I say, claiming and stating that her opinion NASA did not go to the moon. So this just gives you, I mean, this is just a very interesting incident. And so NASA replies, a very curt, unprofessional reply, going, yeah, we went 6 times, so many years ago, whatever. And she didn't like it. She didn't like that answer. And so a number of weeks ago, this topic came up. And so I did a search on Wikipedia, and of course they defend it to the ceiling. My personal public statement on the moon landing, the Apollo moon landings, the alleged Apollo moon landings back in the late 60s and early 70s, is that it is a unverified scientific claim. Okay? There's a lot of big questions. NASA erased all of the documentation. They lost it, all the films. They even admitted that a lot of the filming and a lot of the photographs were faked, done in a warehouse, and so, I mean, there's a lot of real serious questions revolving this. But my official statement in the scientific sense, which is very accurate, is that it is an unverified scientific claim. And now remember that the people responding to Kim Kardashian, that NASA went to the moon, weren't even born. They were not even born when the Apollo space program was going on. So, of course, they have no firsthand knowledge. They're just repeating what they read in a textbook someplace. And, of course, they have to, because they're NASA. If it were discovered and widely understood that NASA did not go to the moon, what have they been doing? Because they really haven't done much since. Okay, so enough of that. But I wanted to preface this video. First of all, look at it for what it is. It's a very high-level talk on electric highways to the stars, one of my topics, the term that I coined, and it's based on my work on electromagnetic propulsion systems. We will never, I will repeat this, we will never get anywhere in the solar system, let alone to other stars, with chemical or nuclear rockets. These are inertial rockets. You heat something up, you send it out a nozzle or a jet stream of some kind, ion engine, but you have to carry the mass along to eject. And of course, the higher the velocity of that ejection mass, then the faster you go. But taking, chemical rockets, nuclear rockets, whatever you design, are not going to get us very far in outer space. Electromagnetic propulsion systems are the way to go. But they have certain limitations. But anyway, the end result is that, and I want to insert this also. Well, no, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole now. But what I wanted to do here is go through levels of proof. Now let's pretend we're investigating a crime, a scene of a crime, a murder or a robbery of a bank or some big crime. We're talking high-level crime. And say you're the prosecutor on the case for the government or whoever, you're trying this case, and you have a suspect that you bring in, and all you have is circumstantial evidence, a picture from a distance, the person's car was in the vicinity of the crime at the time, and all you present is circumstantial evidence. And then you go back and you find out that the prosecuting government destroyed a lot of the data that would prove that the person did not commit the crime. And of course, that's illegal. But that's what essentially NASA has done. They have destroyed all of the records, all of the footage, all of the design work, all of the records of everything related to the Apollo program. They can't find it. Oh, gee. How would you lose the most important, the thing that they rely on, the thing that they hang their hat on continually? But let me go through the levels of proof. Okay, now in science, one of the proof methods used is third-party independent verification in a laboratory. So if somebody invents a new process or something and claims that it is something like, say, cold fusion or whatever, then if other people can duplicate this process in a laboratory independently, and the more people that can do it, then the more validity it has. Okay, And so nobody else has ever gone to the moon. So that would mean that NASA is the only entity that ever claims to have gone to the moon and landed people and that walked around on the moon. And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the scene of the crime, so to speak, or the scene of the claim that NASA sent astronauts to the moon. They got out of the spaceship, they walked around, they took pictures, they had a little cart they drove around, and they got back in their spaceship and they came back to Earth. That is the heart of the claim. So if they take a picture from a satellite and show something on the ground, well, photographs are no longer admissible in court because they can be photoshopped. In fact, right now you can take a person's image and create a video, which they're doing right now with 3i Atlas. They got Mishukaku AI, they've got Brian Cox AI, and they're making it look like these people are saying something and it's not them. So the ability to create, falsify images or video is just over the top today, and it's not admissible. So if you go to the Wikipedia page that presents their so-called proof of NASA going to the moon, none of it has anything to do with men walking around on the moon. There are pictures from a distance. Okay, that can be photoshopped. Or they're claiming that it was from other countries, that now other countries, India, China, allegedly have taken photographs of the Apollo lunar landing sites. Well, there again, that's easily faked or photoshopped. And I'm not saying they did that. I'm just saying that it's not admissible. And if you go on the level of, here, I'm going to go through the levels of proof. The first level is on-site at the time. On-site, so if there was an independent news agency that somehow was on the moon when the Apollo astronauts were there and filming it, that would be first-level proof. Some independent news agency. Well, that didn't happen. All we have is NASA's own footage. And in science, you're not allowed to verify your own scientific claim. It's got to be done by third-party independent party. That's simply the way it is. Okay. The on-site remote cameras would be a second one where you don't have actual news reporters there interviewing Neil Armstrong on the moon, but say you had remote cameras, independently operated, etc. Well, that didn't happen either. That's level 2 verification. Now, the other thing is, how close is the verification to the actual scene of the crime? And so if you were in orbit around the moon and took a picture, allegedly, of these scientific locations of the Apollo landing, then you're not close. You don't get much detail. You just kind of get something. You can see something there and there's a shadow. I mean, even if there was something there, it's very, it could be smaller, it could be bigger. It's really not very good proof. And in a court of law, if you're dealing with a crime scene, it would not buy you a verdict at all, or conviction at all. And so this is what they're relying on. They're relying on third. The other thing is to have it happen shortly after the event. We're in the year 2025. This is like a half a century ago, folks, when they're making this claim. So now, half a century later, somebody's taking a picture from remotely from an orbit. Pretty slim evidence. And I would not, and there again, it doesn't have anything to do with men getting out of a spaceship and walking around, getting back in a spaceship, taking off and coming back to Earth, with all the complications and difficulties that are associated with that. So what they're presenting as staunch proof that you have to believe in is, let me just put it like it is, it's bullshit. Okay? NASA and its allies, Wikipedia and other outfits, are presenting just complete bullshit. And it's not proof of any kind. It's the weakest form of proof possible. And then they say, oh, well, people had radios tuned in and they saw the space capsule where it was supposed to be at the time. Again, Again, none of this holds any water at all in terms of proof that men went to the moon, walked around on the moon. No, not at all. All third, fourth, and fifth level independent, but non-verifiable by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to play this video, and once again, I encourage you to listen to the message, which is Electric Highways to the Stars, not get sidetracked by this moon landing thing. And once again, it's totally disgusting that we are still that the topic keeps rolling around to this. And really, at this point, NASA can never really prove anything that it had men there in the late 1960s, because the real claim is that men were walking around on the moon. How do you verify that? Just to end with this, NASA hired companies, put out bids for companies to put equipment on the moon. In other words, can you go there and put some kind of equipment there that would resemble the Apollo space landing gear, and so we can make the claim that we went to the moon? They actually did that. So anyway, like I say, with that said, and the fact that Kim Kardashian, somebody who's not a scientist, let's put it that way, and she has no record of being in the scientific or engineering realm, comes and approaches NASA and then turns away with an answer from NASA that really a non-scientist does not cater to, not buy into. That's very interesting. And so with that in mind, I want you to watch this video. Remember, okay, it's from, and then remember now I had the lead-in done. This was pre-recorded. So you're going to see, first of all, me again with the lead-in, a couple minutes, introducing this video, and then the ending. I'm not going to put another ending on it, but it'll be what was pre-recorded probably 6 months or more ago. So thank you, and enjoy this video.
Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanny. The Good Professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanny.
Good evening, and tonight on the ongoing series here, this is something that I think that's very important for my audience to understand, is the history of where this come from. And I think a lot of times in the age we live in, people really don't understand the history of people, places, things, etc. So this will give you an idea. Now this, tonight's video, I'm going to insert one of what I call historically important videos, is from 2004. I was the lead speaker at the International UFO Congress held in Laughlin, Nevada. Last week, I showed the video from the 2003 video of the UFO Congress, where I was lead speaker, also talking about Planet X. But this week, from the 2004 UFO Congress, my talk was about electric highways to the stars. That was the name of the talk, and there was a large contingency because of the anticipation of this topic and my work in electrical propulsion systems, which up to this time had been strictly in the Tier 1 military groups, etc. There was a lot of interest in people in NASA, etc., listening to this, and so there was a large contingency. And by the way, the audience was about 1,200 people. That was the size of the audience in the auditorium at the hotel. It was a Laughlin, Nevada. It was a hotel there that had a big area for the talk. And so I'm talking in front of, like I say, about 1,200 people. But in the back region, the right back corner, was a big contingency of NASA scientists and Tier 1 scientists. And so interestingly enough, after the talk, I had a book signing, and this was where I was releasing one of the releases of the book, my book, Atlantis to Tesla, The Colburn Connection. And I had already released it on Coast to Coast AM radio show. It was a big success, so a lot of people were interested in getting this book. And then I had a book signing, so people would come and buy the book, and then I would sign it and talk to them a little bit. So after the talk, I had this book signing out in the hallway. They had this adjacent auditorium where all of the speakers had a table, literally, and the people could come around, and you would attend your table throughout the week of the conference and then talk to people. But also after the talk, immediately after, there was what they called the signing table, and that's where the author, the speaker, typically would have a book and then sign the books. And so I'm at my author's table after this talk that you're about to see here. I'm at my table, and I notice back kind of in the distance, here's this guy. He's just kind of leaning up against a table, watching everybody. And it took actually probably quite a few hours for the crowd to clear away from my table from the book signing, and the very last person finally left. And this guy comes over, and he comes up to my table, and he says, "Hi." So I stood up because I could tell he was not your average person. He was dressed in plain street clothes, but you can tell people, they're a level above what you normally see on the street. So anyway, I stood up and I shook his hand. He gives me his card. He was the physics officer, science officer, physicist, nuclear physicist on a nuclear submarine. And so we talked a little bit, and I had made some comments about nuclear submarines, and we talked a little bit, and then he said, "We've been watching you for years." And he said, "We cannot figure out how you come to all your conclusions. You're right, spot on." He said, "We have teams of the best physicists, Tier 1 physicists, and working on these very same problems, and they can't figure it out, and you do it. You don't have teams, you don't have government funding, you don't have a laboratory." He says, "We don't know how you do this. You just figure out all these physical principles, one after the other one, and he said, everything you're doing is right." So anyway, it was a very interesting interaction for me to have that input coming back to me from a true Tier 1 scientist. Like I say, a nuclear physicist, the science officer on a nuclear submarine. And then, of course, I had been talking about Atlantis and the discovery of Atlantis in the South China Sea. And even to date, my goodness, you see these Looney Tunes running around, it's the Azore Islands, or it's people have no clue what they're talking about. But there again, this is supported disinformation, trying to keep you, the public, stupid. Anyway, without further ado, I'll play this video. It's rather long. It's about 90 minutes. And so if you're listening to this on a radio show, typically the radio shows will go for an hour, specifically my WWCR shortwave show. And so you'll have to go to the web page, the jmccsci.com web page, to pull down the entire show so you can hear the last part of it that will be cut off for the radio presentation, and hopefully watch the TV show because there's a lot of visuals in this also. So without further ado, here is the video of the 2004 International UFO Congress.
Good morning, everybody. We are so happy that you're back with us this morning to start this day off. Our next speaker is Professor James McKinney. Now, I don't know how many of you guys out there really know very many hard scientists. I dare say that most of you probably know a few. And the wonderful ideas and the foresight that we try to bring into the scientific area. And if you go back and try to share a little bit of this foresight, a little bit of this new thinking with these hard scientists, usually they go, well, you can't get there from here, and that doesn't work, and oh no, that violates this law. You know, closed, totally closed mind. And this is the thing that I so love about Professor McKinney, because if you go up to him with an idea, it's, oh, well, let me think about that. Oh, how novel. Let me think about, how could that be? The evidence shows us that things are not as they're supposed to be, maybe, with traditional science. So you have a brilliant man, brilliant mind, that is willing to open up and think. Okay, today, brief Planet X update, and then we're going to get a look at the collage of work that Professor McKinney has done in many of these areas, which ultimately is going to lead us to the electrogravitic highway to the stars. Professor James McKinney.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you all for coming. Try and pack into 90 minutes everything I can as I develop a frog in my throat. So starting right off, as Bob said, this will be a collage of work that I've done. Last year, if you recall, my video or presentation, which is now on video, reviews my history as a scientist. So I'm just going to briefly talk about that just to kind of fill in the blanks for this talk. And then I'm going to go into the future where I'm going, the work I've done in my personal direction. This past year I started a private space program, and I've learned some very valuable things, and I'm going to talk about those right now and then encapsulate at the end with the same idea. That many times people say, well, how much money do you think it would take to do this? Everybody says money. In space, there is no such thing as money. Money, if you base your program on money, you're bound to fail. But you cannot produce enough money or economic goods on this planet to go out and continue to go out into outer space. Another principle, if you try and take your military with you, you will fail because you're going to put so much resource into the military component. And believe me, when you get out there, the people out there already have some six-shooters that are way bigger and better than ours. So don't even bother wasting your resources, which brings up a principle. I heard a leader, no names mentioned, who said, space is our next battleground. Uh-oh, we're in big trouble because we can battle on this planet all we want, and nobody's going to care a whole lot out there. But as soon as you cross that line, you know, like you're a little kid and somebody says, don't cross that line. Well, now we're big kids, and somebody's going to try and cross that line. And as a civilization, as a society, a worldwide society, we have to stop that. And this is a test. This is a test of humanity. This is the test that's going to allow us out there or not. So with that in mind, I want to start back with a reading from something called the Kolbrin, and an amazing book that's been handed down to us from pre-Christian times, from time before Christ. It was actually preserved by a man named Joseph of Arimathea, who was a great uncle to somebody named Christ. And that book goes far back into prehistory. I want to read a few things from that to introduce this talk. And I think once you understand what's happened in the past, you're going to understand why we have to do what we have to do to go into the future. So the beginning part is about the beginning of man, the origins of man. And so I'm going to read a number of passages here. So man was born, let's see, it's a little difficult to see here. That's okay. So man was born of upheaval and strife. He came wretchedly and tumultuously, the offspring of a distraught earth. All was in discord. Snow fell in the hot wastelands. Ice covered the fertile plains. The forests became seas. So I'm going to move this a little so I can see it better. Where once it was hot, now it was cold, and where no rain had ever fallen, there were floods. So man came forth, man the child of calamity, man the inheritor of a creative struggle, man the battleground of extremes. God came down above the altar, and he breathed into man the breath of eternal life. Into his sleeping body, God implanted a fragment of himself, the seed of a soul and the spark of divinity, and man the mortal became man the heir of God and the inheritor of immortality. Remember, this was written probably 3,000 to 4,000 years ago and handed down to where it was finally preserved around the time of Christ and taken off and placed ultimately in a book called the Kolbrin. There are 3 copies of that book in the United States, and I was recently presented with one of them, actually not so recently, but it's a very tightly guarded set of books. And you can see somebody way back when was trying to tell us something. Henceforth, he, that is man, would have dominion over God's earthly estate. But he also had to unravel the circles of eternity, and his destiny was to be an everlasting seeker and striver for knowledge. It is not for me, that is, God's talking to man, it is not for me to come down to you, but for you to reach out to me. Deep within himself, man knew something greater than himself was always with him and part of him, spurring him on to greater deeds, greater thoughts, greater aspirations. He was perplexed with the difficult problems and set the task of unraveling the illusions of nature. The seeming imperfections. Some of these lines you just have to listen to about 10 times to really understand the importance of what this is saying. The seeming imperfections of earth, the hazards and inequalities of life, the cruelty, harshness, and apparent indifference to suffering and affliction are not what they seem. As it is, earth is perfect for its purpose. It is ignorance of that purpose which makes it appear imperfect. Okay, now about the destruction. And of course, the symbolism in here is what they saw in the sky, the destruction of man. Chapter 3, the destruction and recreation. It is known, and the story comes down from ancient times, that there was one creation, there was not one creation, but two. A creation and recreation. It is a fact known to the wise that the earth was utterly destroyed once and then reborn a second wheel of creation. At the time of the great destruction of earth, God caused a dragon from out of heaven to come to encompass her about. A comet. That's my word in there. The dragon was frightful to behold and lashed its tail. It breathed out fire and hot coals, and a great catastrophe was inflicted upon mankind. The body of the dragon was wreathed in a cold, bright light, and beneath, on the belly, was a ruddy-hued glow, while behind it trailed a flowing tail of smoke. It spewed out cinders and hot stones and the meteor streams that accompany a comet. And its breath was foul and stenchful, poisoning the nostrils of men. Its passage darkened the sky, all heaven and earth being made hot. The seas were loosened from their cradles and rose up, pouring across the land. There was an awful shrilling trumpeting which overpowered even the howling of the unleashed winds. Men stricken with terror went mad at the awful sight. They were loosed from their senses and dashed about crazed, not knowing what they did. The breath was sucked from their bodies and were burnt with a strange ash. Then it passed, leaving earth enwrapped within dark and glowing mantle, which was ruddily lit up inside. The bowels of the earth were torn open in great writhing upheavals, and a howling whirlwind rent the mountains apart. When you walk out of here and you look up at the mountains around here, this is what it's talking about all over the world. This happened. The wrath of the sky monster was loosed in the heavens. It lashed about in flaming fury, roaring like a thousand thunders. It poured down fiery destruction and a welter of thick black blood. Oil. Oil comes from there. It doesn't come from decayed fossil plants. That's one of the biggest myths on the planet. So awesome was the fearfully aspected thing that the memory mercifully departed from man. His thoughts were smothered under a cloud of forgetfulness. The earth vomited forth great gusts of foul breath from awful mouths gathering in the midst of the land. And it continues on. In this manner, the first earth was destroyed by calamity descending from the sky. The vaults of heaven had opened, bringing forth monsters more fearsome than any had ever haunted the uneasy dreams of man. I'm going to go down to the last paragraph. The earth's only true altar of God had offered up a sacrifice of life and sorrow to atone for the sins of mankind. This is talking about the previous civilization. Man had not sinned in deed, but in the things he had failed to do. Man suffers not only for what he does, but for what he fails to do. He is not chastised for making mistakes, but for failing to recognize and rectify them. So, I'm going to weave this into my talk. And could we have the first overhead, please? This past July, I introduced a new book called Atlantis to Tesla, the Colburn Connection. And I had been talking about these concepts with friends, and finally they said, you have to write this down in a book form. It's kind of a bizarre little book, actually, after the scientific work that I've done, and I want to read the subtitle. The subtitle says, "The Science of Atlantis and Tesla Are Rediscovered, Giving a Unique, Untold View of Life on the Lost Continent, Ancient Spacecraft Design, Unlimited Electrical Power, and the Secret Societies." And that's kind of a mouthful, but what it does is it takes the ancient cultures, it brings you up through modern times, and then puts into the book the spacecraft designs which I developed in the early 80s. And from reading it, you understand where we have to go, and that also that the Earth has a big, big problem. We have an enormous problem. We have many problems like nuclear waste. We have problems like the consumption of oil. We have problems like the overbearing New World Order, or whatever you want to call it, that is being implemented. We have a problem where small groups are taking the resources of the many and turning them into their own little playground, so to speak, and preparing for an event which we know is coming, an object coming in from outside our solar system, what I call extrasolar system objects. There is one big one, and we'll talk about the proof that things are coming in from the south. Some object is carrying in an entourage of smaller objects, which we are seeing, and ultimately telling us also the sun is kicking up tremendously over its normal cycle, which has been steady for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Something big is going on. The top people in the world are gathering all the resources for themselves at a critical time when we need these resources to move basically off of this planet, as we have a world leader saying, we're going to make that into a battleground, consuming vast resources in the process, not understanding the history that I just read to you, not understanding where the civilization has to go and how everybody has to contribute to this effort in some manner. We have a society that cares more about the Super Bowl than it does about the budget, which is taking unlimited amounts of resources and pouring them into black operations that we will never see or benefit from. Incredible, incredible time on this planet, and we're walking down the wrong road. There's no question about it. So let's have the next overhead, please. This is the cover of the Colburn, the way it looks today. The original texts were in scroll form and handed down. It had basically two translations before the English translation, and the purpose of keeping this book was to keep it in its original format. If you read a Bible today from any other source, it has been changed, limited, altered, and with many interpretations inserted into little sound bits to where you can't even understand what it's talking about. This is the original Bible that was the basis of the Old Testament. This is a map of the South China Sea area. Let me take my pointer here. This region right in here is the South China Sea. It's a very shallow, almost unnavigable region for boats today, and it is very clear that this is the mother home of the continent of Atlantis. There are many other regions around the world which were portions of Atlantis. Atlantis was a worldwide colony, but the mother continent was right here in the South China Sea. The entrance to Atlantis was through here. Between what we now call Java and Sumatra, there are the Pillars of Hercules. Krakatoa and its sister volcano, back in the old days of the Atlanteans, were active in the plumes of smoke coming up into the air, were the Pillars of Hercules, where the mariners entered, and they could see this all over the Indian Ocean. And that's what would bring them into Atlantis. They could see the glow from hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And you would come into the channel there and then into Atlantis. Atlantis was a place that could not be attacked. They had
equipment, lasers, if you will, some type of power where they could burn the enemy out of the water. It was also surrounded by tremendous weed beds, from what we understand from the history. But the point here is that the Atlanteans knew how to derive electrical energy from the atmosphere. Something I kind of came in the back door on this technology because I understood how the solar system developed a large capacitor from an excess current of protons in the solar wind. I was just kind of a mad scientist in the back room doing theoretical work, and out of this came the principles. I also have spent quite a bit of time working with archaeological, historical information, and what's very clear is the Atlanteans knew how to use this. They knew how to use glass. They knew how to use natural materials, and basically were able to ride the electromagnetic rivers. And we don't know how far they got before the other shoe came down, but apparently they weren't in the eyes of the people out there what it seems. And of course, corroborating this is difficult because we don't have historical records. This is a slide, my vision, my personal little drawing of what Atlantis looked like. The five-ringed city, and in the very center was a gold statue of Poseidon drawn by 5 golden horses. And you could see this statue from hundreds of miles away as you came into the five-ringed city. And it was ultimately an energy collector with the current sheet coming down from the ionosphere, something we now know for a fact we can do and derive tremendous amounts of energy, with the electromagnetic spacecraft flying up and down that electric current sheet. And that's part of what I'll be talking to today, are the propulsion systems. How do you ride the electromagnetic rivers of current into outer space, off to Mars, off to the other planets, and ultimately off to the other stars? And why the technology that we currently have in the form of nuclear engines or chemical rockets or ramjets is not going to get us anywhere. The other thing that was in that past overhead, could you put that one back up, please? Off to the right-hand side, you'll see the, oops, it's gone. Off to the right-hand side, you'll see what I have look like some black boxes. We now know they had seawater batteries. These were big casks that they let seawater in and basically had these hooked up in series. I'll be showing some modern versions of the seawater battery, which were actually patented by Edison around the turn of the 1900s. And this is another point I want to make to bring this up to today's modern society. Around the late 1800s, there was a group of guys, Edison, Tesla, Marconi, and on, who clearly were being fed secret information. This information clearly was coming from, for example, the Vatican. Basement archives, that was one source, and we don't know all of the other sources. But when Tesla went out to build his tower, which we'll see in a minute, it's very clear that he had some rudimentary information that came from somewhere. Edison had some information that came from somewhere when he invented that battery. And so at any rate, this is the ancient knowledge being brought into modern society. Next overhead, please. Could I have the next overhead, please? Okay, thank you. This is a map of the United States. The red circles are the, I forget which type of nuclear power plant, but these are basically the pyramids, the round circles, and the cubes are nuclear power plants. They're just different types, water reactor, steam reactor, whatever. But this is the map of our nuclear power system in the United States. And down at the very bottom of the lower left, that key shows a symbol where we have waste facilities. we really have a problem here in the United States. We've been generating this stuff for decades, this nuclear waste, and now we have so much of it, they're starting to store it outside of these nuclear power plants above ground in casks. And I'm sure you're all familiar with our near neighbor here, Yucca Mountain, and the back and forth legal battle that's going on there to try and bury this stuff, as our society always does, like with a big pen, out of sight, out of mind. But it's really not out of mind, because that stuff is going to pollute this planet forever. We have generated a tremendous problem, and we never had to do this. We could have had, from the time Tesla was with us, we could have had Tesla towers in all of these spots, generating power, providing free electricity. Next overhead, please. This is a picture of our sun, and there's a comet near it. But the point here is that this sun produces a tremendous amount of electrical energy. We now know how to tap into that. My work has rediscovered what the Atlanteans were doing, what Tesla was doing. Next overhead, please. By the way, just a brief comment on that comet. The environment near the sun is the equivalent of the following. Take a garden hose, not a garden hose, but a fire hose, a high pressure big hose, and let's convert it a little bit to be the equivalent of what the sun is like near right where that comet was. The speed of the water coming out of the hose is 600,000 miles an hour, okay? It's 6,000 degrees. And we're told by people in the scientific community that that comet is nothing more than a half a mile wide rock with a sprinkling of snow on it. This is a view of what's called the Eskimo Nebula, but this is what our star would look like from a great distance if you looked at it. In the very center there is a small dot. That's the star, and all of these layers which are around it, scientists say that those were blown off a long time ago and they are just sitting there. My interpretation of this is that these are the solar capacitor rings. These are the rings of electrically charged material which surround this star, and when something comes in from a distance, it's doing the equivalent of what the backyard bug killer does, that zapper thing. When you come into this region, you discharge that, and that physical image that we see, the visual part of that discharge, we call a comet. That's what a comet is. It's discharging this capacitor, and in the process, drawing in this material into the negatively charged nuclear area. Next overhead, please. This is the cover of my book, Planet X, Comets and Earth Changes. And this book is basically a scientific treatise on my work dealing with the electric solar system, and basically a science book for the general public on how this works. But could I have that slide again? Just a moment, please. I want you to note the figure down at the bottom. This is an archaeological pictograph from Green River, Utah. And I just want to talk about the two outside long broom-like objects. Those are obviously comets. The one on the right has a very large circle drawn in it, which we now recognize as a huge nucleus. The fact that they drew it as being round, not the little potato-shaped things that we see today in these little teeny comets. These are huge comets, the kind that we have not seen in scientifically recent times, the last 300 years. And notice the little helical spike out here. That is an indicator of part of the comet, which we don't see, the electron beam coming out from the sun. Next overhead, please. The idea here is that the universe is very electrical. And now that we know that it's electrical, what exactly do we do with it? This is a kind of a stick diagram, so to speak, of a comet. These are electric field lines where the material comes in. This is the immediate zone around the nucleus. The nucleus is that small dot. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. But passing through from the sunward side back to the back is an electron stream. Now, the important point here is that a comet or object is concentrating a large amount of current and latent energy in through the region of the comet nucleus. And I've figured out how to use this principle as a design for what I call a space kite. You can take a little bit of that energy and convert it into propulsion and ride the magnetic field that's generated by that electrical current. It's like a kite in that it's a passive propulsion system. You do not have any working parts, you don't expend any energy, you don't carry any mass along with you. So the idea is that there's a design, and Mother Nature, or God, whatever you will, has provided us with a mechanism to get out there and travel amongst the stars, a very simple way. And so basically I'll be talking about that again. Now I want to introduce a topic here, inertial propulsion systems. An inertial propulsion system is one in which you heat up something and throw it out a nozzle, like a chemical rocket, the space shuttle, the Saturn V rocket, the kind of rockets we see on Earth. Very limited in their scope. What happens is there's a problem in physics called the rocket problem. What happens is if you put a payload on top of that rocket and send it off into outer space, excuse me, that's fine. Excuse me. What if you want to double the size of your payload? Well, you think, well, just add more fuel. But now you've added more mass to your rocket, so you have to add more fuel just to get the fuel lifted off the ground. So as you build bigger and bigger rockets, you don't get bigger and bigger payloads. It's not linear. If you double the size of your rocket, you don't double the size of your payload. So you're very limited. And now let's try and get to the next planet or out to the moon. We have to start sending individual things up there, couple them together, and then go out to these other planets. By the way, there's a small problem with going to the moon, and inch by inch, NASA is leaking out that they know that there's a problem there. It's called the Van Allen belts, high radiation belts of charged particles around Earth, and we don't know how to get through them, they say. Well, isn't that interesting? Because there sure didn't seem to be a problem back in 1969. Obviously, they didn't go to the moon. The United States did not go to the moon. The Russians knew it all along. I thought at the time we did, but I've since learned we absolutely did not. And there's no question about it. And they're starting to figure it out. NASA has a program called Living with a Star. That's a pretty name for how do we get through the Van Allen belts. They have all their top scientists working on it. It's a tremendous problem because we do not have any kind of a spacecraft that we can send up that doesn't have metal in it. And when these charged particles hit metal, they produce X-rays. Nothing you can do to get around that. So anybody sitting around something metal in outer space in the Van Allen belts is going to be French fried. And so that whole thing was a giant hoax. And you have second and third tier scientists in the United States who are running around saying, oh, yes, we did, yes, we did. But the very top level people, what I call the tier one scientists, the black op mill scientists, know for a fact we didn't go. And it's a real problem. They don't know how to get through there. In my research, I have discovered how to get through the Van Allen belts. And I use an analogy. It's like baking a cake that rises. Once you know the trick, it's easy, but it's kind of like golf also, in that if you have a golf swing, there's many aspects to it. So it's not exactly easy. If you even if you know the main principle, you're still going to have to work out a lot of more detail. But at any rate, with my background in electromagnetism and understanding the plasma nature of the solar system, I've learned how to get through the radiation belts. But it's something I'm not telling. One thing that hopefully provides me with another shield of safety in the work that I do. But absolutely, we did not go to the moon. The point is, nature has provided us with easy ways to get around out there. But once again, don't spend money doing this. When I've defined my own personal space program, I've defined it based on resources, human resources, engineering resources, material resources. When you're out on some planet or another star system, there's not going to be a store you can go and buy a bolt, right? Or whatever you need. It's like the old sailors. If they broke a mast, they didn't call home to England and say, send over a new mast. They had to go anchor, go in the woods, cut down a mast, put it on the ship, and re-rig the ship and go away, right? This is what outer space is like, but 100,000 times more complicated and dangerous. So we have to learn how to live out there, how to produce food out there, how to live out there. Today, our space program sends supplies up to the space station so they can open up nice little packages and eat their meal and drink Tang. That is not what the Chinese are going to do, I guarantee you. The Chinese are on their way out there, and they are far beyond us now, and we're not going to catch them because we're too interested in executives in aerospace companies making big profits. So at any rate, next slide, please. This is just, I've got 3 slides. This is a picture of the sun, excess current of protons, some solar flaring going on. That's the solar capacitor with a surface fusion on the sun, which is a whole nother topic. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. But the sun's fusion is up at the surface, not down in the core. Next slide, please. Here is an object, like I was talking about, coming into the solar capacitor, discharging that solar capacitor just like a bug discharges the backyard bug killer, but this is a plasma cloud. It's not a little set of metal grids. And you can see the electron stream coming out from the sun and the ion stream coming into the object discharging the solar capacitor. That's what we call a comet. Now, if you put your spaceship out here, it's going to do the same thing. That creates a concentration of electrical current by your spacecraft. And I want to use an example for the space kite that I've developed. Say you have a riverboat and you want to go upriver. It would be the equivalent of having a mechanism on that riverboat where you take some of the passing river's energy, convert it into propulsion, and you go upstream. Very similar. Okay, next slide, please. This is just showing you how the transfer of energy goes into the sun. I have that kind of double arrow right next to the sun. This is extremely important. The sun is building up this huge energy capacitor. Something comes in and discharges that capacitor. Some of that energy ends back up in the sun. It's flowing into the sun, and since the fusion process is up at the surface of the sun, it excites the sun and drives up the sun's energy. This is what we're seeing over the past number of years. But we don't see the object that's causing this because it's coming in from the southern region of the solar system. It's at this point, my estimation, and I don't have a time scale, I've tried to make some observational sessions in the southern hemisphere, only to find out that there is a thin water haze layer at about 30,000 feet that is encompassing our planet right now, and you cannot see out at an angle. So you literally have to go to the South Pole and set up an observation platform with telescopes and astronomical equipment because what you're looking for is basically a thin, hazy water cloud. So you can't look through water to see water, basically, is the bottom line. But the bottom line is we can see the sun being pumped up by something. We know something is moving into this solar system, and it's a big comet. It's coming from the south, and I'll show some videos here of the other comets coming from the south, crashing into the sun, and in fact, causing the sun to explode. Next slide, please. This is a picture of a type of propulsion system that's on the drawing board. This was out of Discover magazine, where they showed, I think, 4 or 5 what you'd call drawing board designs for extra solar system or interstellar vehicles. These will not work because you have to carry the matter along with you, or you have to pick it up along the way to make this engine work. And then you use antimatter explosions or nuclear explosions of some kind to heat up the material. Turns out you don't get much more energy out of a nuclear reactor than you do out of a chemical reaction. So you're not going to get to the stars with that type of a propulsion system. That is what I call inertial propulsion system, where you accelerate this matter out the back end. Okay, next slide, please. This is from the Atlantis to Tesla, the Colburn Connection book. It's a paper that I wrote in 1982, published in some aerospace magazines. And basically, this is one of the propulsion systems. Now, it's a very subtle idea, and if you look at it, it looks kind of like what we call a flying saucer. It was obviously recognized when I introduced this into the military groups in 1982. I was in California looking for funding, and at the time, I told the venture capitalist group and the small company that was forming around my idea and myself, I told them in a meeting one day that I did not want this being used for military purposes. I didn't want it delivering nuclear bombs. And they all looked at me like I was out of my mind, because that's exactly what they wanted to do with it. So I was distanced from my own project, but basically what you do is you take electrons, put that very outer ring is a set of tubes, glass or ceramic tubes, and the electrons ride around the rings in the same direction. The top ring moves to the top and around. The bottom ring, the electrons move this way. And the return current comes over the outside skin of the spacecraft to complete the circuit. This is one of the electromagnetic propulsion systems. It's very much in the public domain. But as I was giving this information out to the venture capital groups that were trying to get funding to develop this, and I was being distanced from my project, and I realized that I didn't give them the key to this propulsion system, which are the fusion batteries that are needed to drive this thing. So that is missing. They've never been able to develop this. Next slide, please. They made some rudimentary attempts. This is just a chart of the various directions you can fly in the magnetic field. The electrons in the tubes push against a local magnetic field, causing the propulsion. Some people might call this anti-gravity. I don't call it anti-gravity. I call it a propulsion system that works against gravity. A little subtle difference there. But you can see that on the top left-hand corner, you can get a vertical flight. You can get various types of lift and forward thrust. The other part of this design is you have spinning wheels inside, and it gives you very much a gyro effect. That's how flying saucers work. This design, by the way, explains what you see when you see one of the flying saucers. A lot of times the fusion engines look as bubbles underneath, and they light up, and the ring around the outside looks like kind of a glowing hamburger, and then the aura of the current coming over the skin is the aurora-looking glow around the spacecraft when they kick in and move. Typically, you have millions of amps flowing through these tubes. Interestingly enough, the bigger you make the spacecraft, the longer the tubes are, the more propulsion you get. So you can make these things as large as you want. Next slide, please. This is a chart of what's called specific impulse. Basically, it's a property that's used in a propulsion theoretical work. And the point here is that you see that these rockets, which are either thermoelectric, nuclear, chemical rockets down here, or the space sails up here and the ion engines up in this region, we have two main kinds of propulsion that is used today in the real world, so to speak. One are the chemical rockets. They have a high amount of thrust, very hot temperatures, and they burn out very quickly. The other type of engines will go over a much longer period of time, but they have very low propulsion, very low thrust. The magnetic propulsion system that I just showed you sits up in the upper right-hand corner of this. Up in the right-hand corner here is where the propulsion system that I showed you sets. In other words, it provides high thrust and a long period of time for the thrust. So the idea is that there is an electromagnetic propulsion system, not a chemical or nuclear inertial propulsion system, and this is the way to get to the stars and move around the solar system. So at any rate, that's the overheads. Now I'm going to go to the computer and quick run through some slides. How do I turn this on? Could you turn that computer on for me? Okay. While Nikki's working on that, oh, I just heard that little music. Oh, at any rate, what I'll do then is drop down in the topic list here a little bit. The point of what I want to bring across today is the fact that, like I started with, the programs that we see going on today, where first of all they're based on money. I don't care how much money you appropriate to a space program, in the method, in the world we live in today, it's not going to be enough. Because ultimately you're going to hit a wall, and that's the end of it. You can't generate any more resources to go farther because space is three-dimensional. We can go out and around orbit. That's kind of a two-dimensional space effort. Once we start going out in 3 dimensions, we have to provide an incredible amount of resources, and our society is not structured this way. If we have to base our space effort on money, taking that money, putting it into a 10-year program in an aerospace corporation, thousands and thousands of engineers make $100,000 a year, consultants make $200,000 a year, executives make $81 million a year bonuses. That's where your space program is going to go, into somebody's bank account, and you're going to end up without a space program. We need a culture. When NASA started, it was supposed to be a civilian space program. And that didn't happen. Somehow it got converted into something very different. And now the majority of NASA is in black ops. The conversion of $11 billion of current NASA programs into a single program is just a small piece of the pie. There in the budget, which you didn't see in the newspaper because you had Janet Jackson at the top of the newspaper headline on the day when the budget was released. Gee, I wonder if that was an accident. And the budget's down at the bottom, and they just didn't have room to give you much detail about the budget, you know. But I can tell you a little bit about it. $60 billion for one appropriation, just one small, for new aerospace hardware. Didn't say what that was. That's 4 times NASA's annual budget. So when they move $11 billion out of NASA's annual budget within the next couple of years, what they're going to show you will be, it will be a couple Disney animations trying to wow you into thinking that something really is going on. But that 11 billion is being put in the bigger pool that you will never see or benefit from. So at any rate, we're now at the slides. Let's have the computer on the screen, please. Oh, it's on that side. Oh, okay, great. So now what I want to show you are the comets coming in from the south. And if you've seen my homepage, I've got dozens and dozens of these. I picked a couple just to show you. And look down in this region where I've got the mouse arrow coming up. There it comes. You see it? Boom. The sun explodes. Now, according to NASA, that's a half a mile wide little ice ball. Do you think that that's causing the sun to explode the way it does, and it's a little ice ball? Well, according to those people, that explosion is just coincidence. How many of these do you have to see until you realize that it's not coincidence? Comets are electrically active, they're discharging the solar capacitor, and that energy is getting pumped back into the sun. That's what's causing our sun to be built up, the energy to be built up over a long period of time. Let me make it clear. Not all solar flares are caused by comets. So when you get the disinformation crew out there trying to badmouth me, they go, oh, McCanney's saying all flares are caused by comets. No, not saying that. But you can see that it is a contributor to the overall picture of what we're seeing with the sun today. Okay, so let's flip through these. This is a picture of Pluto with the Hubble Space Telescope and Charon, its little moon companion out here at the top left. Now we know the diameter of Pluto, and you can take the pixel count here of Pluto, and NASA has told us they can't take a picture of the lunar landing sites with the Hubble Space Telescope. This picture proves they can. They've given some kind of theoretical estimate for the resolving power of the Hubble Space Telescope based on the diameter of the mirror, but that equation's for a Newtonian telescope. Not many people understand these fine details. The Hubble is not a Newtonian telescope, so it doesn't follow that aperture rule that they try and pass off. And this picture is with the new Hubble camera, and it shows that, in fact, if you take this angular distance out to Pluto and you translate it into the surface of the moon, we can, in fact, resolve the landing sites, the alleged lunar landing sites. And the way you would do this is you take the pictures at dusk when the shadows became very long, and it would be a very hard thing for them to fake. So at any rate, we have telescopes on Earth that are much larger than the Hubble. Much better resolving power. So why, you would think these astronomers would be chomping at the bit to show you those lunar landing sites. And look at the incredible resolving power of this telescope we have here. Why have none of them done that? Because there ain't nothing there. And we get all kinds of excuses. Oh, we can't turn the telescope up there because the moon's too bright. Well, then all of a sudden we saw the full moon on a web page, on a NASA web page, the entire full moon taken with the Hubble Space Telescope. And you're telling me they can't take one little teeny patch of the moon, which is millions of times less bright. So bottom line is, they know they didn't go. This is a picture of the early, this is probably out of the 60s, it's a drawing from Russia, showing a possible space shuttle scenario, but the Russians very early decided that the space shuttle was a very bad idea for many of the reasons that we're finding out. Oops, word, oops. Uh-oh, what did I do? Nikki, I lost my, uh-oh. I got it back. Okay, thank you. Let's go over here. Now I want to show you, this is a picture of the Edison battery I was talking about earlier. Around the 1900s, Edison patented this, but it was a very subtle thing he did. This is a glass jar, and I'll show you the insides of it in a minute, the plate structure. The screw on top is one of the poles, and then the wire sticking out is the other pole of the battery. The contents of this battery is simply a glass jar about this big. This particular battery came out of an antique railroad station. They used to use these in series. It produces about 0.9 volts. You put them in series, and that's what they used to use for lights and things like that around the turn of the century. The contents of this, the liquid contents, is water and sodium sulfite. It turns out that the seawater batteries are sodium chloride, and it's the differential between the electronegativity of the metals. You have two metal plates just like we have in our modern sulfuric acid car batteries or deep cycle batteries, but it's the difference in the types of metal that you put in there, the plates, that then cause the electrolytic solution to work on them and create the electricity. So at any rate, since you can't patent seawater, Edison was smart enough to know that he had to change it to something similar, so he used, instead of sodium chloride, he used sodium sulfide, very similar chemical composition. And when the battery ran down, you just poured out the liquid, you poured in a new solution, and you were good to go again. This concept, I believe, came from information that that Edison got, and by the way, Tesla worked for Edison in the early days. Here's a picture of the Russian space program rockets on the right-hand side versus the shuttle program, which we've been strapped with for the last 20 years or so in the United States. And I just want to mention here, the Russians have gone into space thousands and thousands and thousands of times. There was a small aircraft called the Cosmos, a little mini shuttle re-entry vehicle. Between 1962 and 1976, the Russians had no less than 1,600 flights with that little reusable, and they had many, many versions of it. They had tens of thousands of people in space, and you never heard about it here, did you? While we were waiting for that one guy to go up in space here. Here's the insides of the Edison battery. You can see it's kind of a plate structure. I think zinc and lead were the two metals they used in this. And it's a very simple little plate structure. And battery design is quite a complicated thing, and of course we've come a long way. Now, as long as I'm talking about that, something that's come both through my own research, I discovered it and then had enough insight to go contact the right people. Something that always amazed me is that nuclear submarines could go around the ocean undetected, and they got this nuclear generated, and they got to get rid of the heat somehow. So that heat signature would be obviously detectable from any place in outer space under the ocean. It'd be very easy to detect. What I finally figured out is they run those things off seawater batteries. And Atlantis used seawater batteries. Gee, I wonder if our military has any information that has come down from them, from the ancients. Now, one thing I talk about in my book, Atlantis to Tesla, is something that happened to me. I was surfing the internet back in the late 90s, and I was looking for underwater video equipment, the kind you would troll behind a boat, and the object was to look for archaeological sites underwater and get a research boat, or just give them to people who had boats to drag around and see if we could determine where some archaeological sites were, because we know there's some like in the Caribbean and in the Gulf of Mexico off of Yucatan. We know they're there, we just want to find them and go down and look at them. Well, at any rate, on this one website where this company was producing this equipment, they had a link, and of course I hit it. I end up in the back end of a secure Navy site, and I start surfing the site. Not knowing, of course, if I would have known that was a secure site, I would have obviously immediately left. But I searched around, and what they were doing was they were looking in the South China Sea, and I'm going, what are they doing in the South China Sea? Well, I already knew that there was a Brazilian physicist who had made a chart of where Atlantis was, and he had taken all the different places that have been proposed for Atlantis. The main continent I'm talking about, Atlantis, remember, was all over the world. The Atlantic Ocean covered the entire world, and it was called the Ocean of the Atlanteans. But I was interested in where the home site of Atlantis was. And this physicist put a chart together. On one side were all the properties that had to exist if it was Atlantis. On the other chart were all the places that have been proposed as being Atlantis. And what he came up with was the fact that Atlantis had to be in the South China Sea. And he explained that the Atlantic Ocean was the entire ocean, and that the Pillars of Hercules were the volcanoes of Krakatoa. And you can go back and trace his research back, and he's right. The home city, the five-ring city, and as early as 1999, our US Navy was over there excavating that. Okay. If you go to my homepage, this is at the very top, and it's going to stay there. It's a picture of Tesla's tower around the early 1900s, one of the two that he built. Now, you have to understand, Tesla didn't ever build an intermediate-sized tower. He went out right out of the chute and built the big one. Knew exactly what frequency it should be tuned to derive energy out of the atmosphere. And that whole thing with Westinghouse is, you know, the history of that is well known, so I'm not going to talk about that. But look at this thing. As a physicist, I know that you don't just go build something like this. There's the size of the wire to use, the insulation between on the outside of the wire in the wrappings. This is a tuned electrical circuit. You need huge tubes to drive the spark generating, what would you call it? The electronics that drive this. It's incredible the amount of information he had to have to build this tower, and he did it right out of the chute. Well, it's my estimation, and Tesla said himself, that he got his start from information he saw through his father, who worked at the Vatican in the archives. So at any rate, just want to show that, an incredible piece of equipment, and it was torn down so that we could use oil, eventually nuclear power. They've known all along that there was a way to derive free energy. Here's another set of comets coming in. This was actually in 1999. And you see the comets coming in. The first one misses the flare. Whoops, I'm sorry, whoops. I jumped ahead just a little bit here. There's a kind of a thing on the side of this mouse I keep hitting. Let's go back to this. Okay, right here, the first comet coming in misses that flare. The second comet comes in and directly hits it, and this is the result. NASA says coincidence. That big flare, the biggest flare we've ever seen in the solar system, just happened to hit exactly when that comet went through it, but coincidence. Now, go back here. Oh, here's the little Russian spacecraft. I didn't know I had a picture of that here. I'll just show that to you. This is a spy photo of one of the Cosmos craft. You see that? That's the, you can see the guys pushing it there. They had, like I say, 1,600 of these things. The Russians were all over space, but they never went to the moon. They knew about the radiation belts. They knew they couldn't get through them. Here's another picture of comets coming in from the south. Oops, what'd they do? Oh. Now this one comes in, let me see if I can get the pointer over here. I think it's right down here. There it comes, see it? Boom. Another huge explosion as that comet hits the sun. And all of these are coming from the south, which is part of the entourage of stuff coming in. Now, there's a lot of information coming from a lot of different directions here in my talk. But what it all amounts to is that we have a serious problem on this planet, and we have a leadership which has decided to take the resources of all of us and put them into their own little program, which we won't ever see. They've developed cave cities where they want to go when this thing comes in, and we're at the edge of going off into outer space, and they're declaring space a battleground. I wonder if this has ever happened before. I wonder if we're an experiment and if we're going to be able to pull this off. And I wonder how to do it. I mean, I don't know. How do you take these people that have military black ops, full information gathering on anybody they want? We find that microbiologists are being murdered, at least 25 in the last year and a half, who've been working on the black ops viral programs in this country with human experimentation. It's a very bizarre situation. So I think I've covered the slides there. I have one page that I usually like to include in a talk like this, and the question is, will man survive? And these are principles that you can pretty much come to on your own, but there's some subtleties to them and you have to understand them. Will man survive? The rules of nature are quite simple. By the way, this is the one chapter I put in all of my books because I think it's so important. Will man survive? The rules of nature are quite simple, and in the case of survival as an intelligent species, one that is capable of altering and controlling its environment, the rule of ultimate survival is clear and very simple. As a species, collectively, if you do not use the time and resources allotted to you to gain access to outer space and gain the knowledge to survive, you will be doomed to extinction. This clearly leads to some secondary basic rules of nature regarding the use of time and resources. Petty wars and the use of resources to fight these wars can have only one possible result, and nature in its own time and manner will repay those species collectively who fail to control their leaders who promote these wars. If there is a smaller group that attempts to use the resources of the many to save their own few and selective hides, these especially will be doomed to die a most lonesome and hideous demise. The successful species, now imagine if we went to another solar system and found what we find here going on. This is the last rule. The successful species that eventually will populate the stars will not allow those unsuccessful species to enter their hard-earned space and bring their petty wars and selfish ways into the cosmos. That is called the rule of survival of the successful, and is universally understood and commissioned to be executed upon those who fail at the first three rules. And the Kolbrin confirms what I was talking about here in that it says very clearly, you're punished for what you failed to do, not by your mistakes. We've got some big mistakes on this planet, and we're failing to correct them. And as a species, they're not going to let us out of here. And if the experiment fails, the whole planet fails with it. So that's where we are today, and I don't have solutions right now. But we do have some very serious problems. They're big problems. And imagine if 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, or even 50 years ago, say when the X-plane project first began, there was a split. And that's when the post-World War II paranoid, Cold War, Cold War scenario mentality came into power and dominated our political scene for the next 50 years, up to where we are today. And now we're carrying it into the next century. We are 4 years into the next century, and we are now at a mental state in this society that predates the Cold War. We have gone back 50 years in time. But technologically advanced and pouring all of our resources now in, if you look at the budget, so to speak, we have poured and are pouring all of our resources into black operation programs and specifically aerospace programs. So at any rate, this has to be turned around, and a lot of people expect me to do something. I really don't know what I can do, because you need the support of everybody. You need the mental support, and you people sitting in this room are an extreme minority. If you go out and talk about this down the street to somebody, they're going to look at you like you're nuts. I guess. Yeah. So where does that leave us? I always find it interesting. There are some lines in the Bible you can always go back to in these ancient texts. For example, many are called, but few are chosen. Is there something to that? Because it's like we do have a certain freedom of movement and ability on this planet. And as you know, those other people who are captivated by the headlines that they put on the news to divert your attention, or everything else. This society is full of diversions for young kids, for middle-aged people, and adults. This is a world of diversions. If you want to be diverted, there's plenty of things, but to narrow down and follow that one narrow little teeny path in the midst of all of this is almost virtually impossible. So you have to be really tuned, really focused, and continually have the drive, like the Colburn says, to seek the knowledge and the ways of the universe. And once you do, they're very simple. It's very, very simple, but very difficult to do. So at any rate, I just want to encapsulate where I'm personally going right now in what I call my private space program. I'm not looking for money. What I'm looking for are resources, because money is a guaranteed failure. I already know that trying to take military equipment into space is a guaranteed failure. I know that trying to go into space, as we have been with chemical rockets, is a guaranteed failure, and any development in that area is bound to fail. So, what's the outline of a true space program that can succeed? Resources that are based on very simple designs, very simple needs, and the ability to live and survive in outer space. It's amazing that we're going to try and do that in outer space when we've not been successful at doing it on this planet. It would be easy to take this planet and, instead of putting $2.4 trillion into the military, take just 1 year of that and put it into restoring this planet. This planet would look like it did 4,000 years ago, a garden. a beautiful place, but man has destroyed it and is bent on destroying the rest of what's left. That's what's going on right now. So I know where I'm going, my particular efforts, but that's not going to go very far as the rest of the world is concerned. At any rate, I'm going to stop there and just mention that after the talk, I will be here for a few days. Because of the number of books and things I have, I'll just remain at my table in the vendor room there. But be happy to talk to you and discuss this with you further. And also encourage you to stay tuned to my webpage, the jmcannyscience.com homepage, which I attempt to keep updated regularly, which has been difficult with all the other things that I've been doing. And if you are not already aware, I have a weekly radio show every Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the internet, and that link is on my website, where I try and give weekly updates on what's going on, where I'm going, where the rest of the world is going, and keep people informed. And I come to learn through the people who run the network that my little radio show is not so little anymore, which is great. So I know there's a lot of people out there listening, a lot of people really trying to find a solution, a place to go, a place to make this thing work. And it's like we're being funneled down the wrong road. How do we stop that? There are some solutions, but frankly, for example, I think we've seen the facts, the last free election in this country, if not already, in a, I don't think we're going to see anymore. But I want to open this up to questions now. I know there's a lot of people with questions, so thank you for coming, and we'll talk to you soon. Oh, that's right. And we've got the time for that. Could we quickly show the tapes, the video tapes? And it'll just take a minute. These will run for just a couple minutes. The first one is on I get a kick out of the effort to find water on Mars. And of course, we've got a couple rovers up there that are on the equivalent of the Sahara Desert looking for water, turning over rocks. But the first video is some footage from early NASA. Now look at the riverbeds here. This is Mars from the early orbiter pictures. You want water? It's all over the place. And then coming up, now look at these riverbeds. These are meandering riverbeds. That's me in 1991, by the way. Is there a way to revert back? Huh? Yeah, somebody have that little vial of... but at any rate, this will change down. We'll see more rivers on Mars. And these are meandering rivers. That's what I'm talking about there. Okay, here we go. These are old meandering rivers on Mars. And it takes a long time for these rivers to form. Obvious evidence of water erosion on Mars. Coming up next is Olympus Mons. I want you to look at the erosion in the mountainside. This is a huge volcano, and you see the water erosion. Oops. There we go. Look at the erosion there. The thing I want to point out is when you see Olympus Mons now with the new higher resolution cameras, it's smooth as a baby's behind. They've taken all the erosion out. So if they're looking for water, there's evidence of water all over. Now, oops, that's enough of that video. You can cut that one, please. But the point of that video is there's water. What happened to the water? It was drawn off when Venus came by about 3,500 years ago. And we have historical records of this. The ancients saw it. Mars was a blue planet. I always get a kick out of the scientists, the geologists who are on this rover program. And they say, well, we think the water just sank into the ground, and we're looking for groundwater. Well, first of all, you wouldn't go to where they went. You'd go in these riverbeds. And second of all, a water planet needs an atmosphere to hold that water in place. What happened to the atmosphere? Did that fall into the ground too? No. It was all sucked off in one amazing catastrophic moment. And when that comet, which later became the planet Venus, when that came by Earth, Mars was smaller, it lost its atmosphere, Earth was bigger than that nucleus of that comet. We had a tremendous pollution event. The Colburn talks about it. Societies from all over the world talk about it. And now the question is, the question of the hour, and you can answer this for yourself. Do you think there are some other machines possibly up on Mars and we're seeing the Mattel version of the lunar or the Mars rover? And that there are structures up there that look like possibly Atlanteans lived there, remains of human buildings, ruins, whatever you would want to call them. And it turns out that in the month of August, part of my weather work, which I didn't even touch on here today, has discovered that there is a vast current sheet that returns from that solar capacitor, comes back to the sun, and that is in the region where we pass through, where Earth passes through in the month of August. I call it the August return current sheet. And it's a driver of our weather systems, of the auroras. That's why the auroral season peaks in August. That's why the hurricane season peaks in August. But you can ride that electromagnetic current to Mars in August. That's the month of passage to Mars with the electromagnetic propulsion systems. So at any rate, with that little piece, let's go to the next movie clip. And now we're really going back to ancient history. This next one was a little classroom demonstration, 1986. And what we've got here is a Van de Graaff ball, which is simulating the sun. And what I've got is a wire coming off that simulates the sunward electron current. And then we light some wood splints and blow them out so there's smoke. And what you're going to see here is the smoke being drawn into what we have simulated as the comet nucleus. Okay, so I'm holding an insulator glass wand with a metal ball on it. You can see the wire connecting to the negatively charged Van de Graaff. This is a simulation of how a comet works. Now watch the smoke accumulation around the ball as it builds up. Now you'll also see that one of the streams of smoke is going away from the nucleus. Those are the negative ions. And you'll see the smoke, the positively charged ions from the smoke stream going to the nucleus. And this is what a comet is doing, right here, a little laboratory simulation. Now watch the cloud that builds up around the nucleus. Do you see that? And all of these properties we can see and measure around comets. Okay, now I think they got a little better wood splint going here. Okay, now watch that. Now watch the cloud build up around the comet. That's the hydrogen cloud, that hydrogen molecular ionized cloud that surrounds a comet nucleus. It's a shield, it's a space charge sheath. But at any rate, okay, well that's enough of that video, but I just wanted to show that as a view of that video, by the way, is called the Comet Lecture video. I've got some of them here if you want to see the whole thing. But I go through a 45-minute lecture in 1986 of the comet theory. And I have this to show people that back in the 80s, I was saying the same thing. My story hasn't changed. The story coming out of the standard scientific community has edged year after year, and now they're trying to figure out how to do my science, but not use my science. That's kind of a tough one. But they've migrated. Now NASA has two programs, Living with a Star program and the Sun-Earth Connection program, and those are the two biggies in NASA. And they're 10-year programs. They just initiated them, and those have two purposes: to figure out how to get through the Van Allen belts and to figure out what the sun is doing to us on Earth. Well, I've answered those questions long ago, and while they're trying to figure that out, I'm working on the propulsion systems to get us off of this planet to the next star. So at any rate, those were some clips. I'm glad they inserted them. The first clip, by the way, is from a video called Astronomy for the 90s. It was professionally produced in 1991. I got a grant while I was teaching university astronomy. I had 193 students, and we took 15 textbooks of college-level astronomy, and I divided the students into groups, and each group got a subject, and they would go linearly through the books. For example, one group would have galactic evolution, one group would have comets, one group would have Venus, and they would see if all the books said the same thing, and who the authors were. And it turns out that the authors of this book reviewed the other book written by other authors who reviewed their books. So this was a big thing, and what they wanted was a full set of books all saying the same thing. The only problem is just about everything they say in there is wrong. But, okay, well, let's go to some questions here. We've got 6 minutes left, and once again, go ahead.
Ron Doyle, Y Files.
Hi.
Professor, you said you have set up in Patagonia. Would you please discuss Harrington's research and what have you seen?
The South American, what I call the Harrington expedition, and what happened was if you look at Earth, South Pole, North Pole, and that region of the Southern Hemisphere, there's very little land down there. If you look at Patagonia, New Zealand, and those are at literally about 45 degrees. New Zealand is at about 40 degrees. So what happens is if you want to look down into that southern region, you have to look through an angle of about like this, with a 30,000-foot haze layer, which you can see if you get up above that in a jet plane. You can look down through it and you can see land down below you, but if you look up at the side, you can't see the land anymore. It just is invisible because you're trying to look to that haze layer. Now, what's happening is you're trying to look at for a very diffuse comet, which is just barely coming in, starting to form. So you're looking for a water cloud, a very diffuse water cloud through water haze, and you can't do it. That was the failure of that whole effort. And so nothing, I was not able to detect anything from that. What's that?
Harrington was? Robert Harrington did see.
Well, yeah, the thing that I am convinced that Harrington saw was Hale-Bopp. And far behind it was, and this haze layer, by the way, is a more recent phenomenon. And I think it's because of the heating that's going on since Hale-Bopp came through and was kicking up the solar energy. We've had a tremendous amount of haze, and you can see it in the world satellite photos. You can see that haze layer, and it's a relatively new thing. And of course, the problem with any land area down there, you don't have high elevations, and you're always very near the ocean. So that haze layer is just a difficult thing. And even if you see a clear sky, the haze layer is up there. But to answer your question, what I think Harrington saw was Hale-Bopp, which was, at the time, by the way, was on a direct collision course with Earth. And as it moved in, it slowed down, and Earth managed to move forward ahead 3 months in its orbit, and we missed. But if we would have been 3 months earlier in our orbit, we would have come within about 750,000 miles of the nucleus of Hale-Bopp. We would have been well within the coma, and we would have spent about 20 days shrouded from the sun inside the coma of Hale-Bopp.
What of 2012?
2012. I'm staying away from predictions, or that's the relative to the Mayan calendar. And I don't know, and I've done a lot of studying of Mayan information, the artifacts, and I don't know. The one thing we know is that comets change their orbits rapidly, and I think the ancients knew that because they called them the lawless ones. They did not follow orbits, and Hale-Bopp proved that. Hale-Bopp came in on a 4,600-year orbit. When it went out 6 years later, it had a 2,600-year orbit.
Thank you for the insightful and profound presentation. My question is about the Van Allen belt. I'm not a scientist, but it had been my understanding that the Van Allen belt, while bad for you, wasn't necessarily deadly. and so that the astronauts who allegedly went through were damaged at the cellular level, but that it wasn't a deadly thing if you got in and out quickly. What do you say about that?
The Van Allen belt is one region. When you're out in the free solar wind, what they didn't understand at the time is that spaceship becomes like a comet, and you are discharging the solar capacitor. Any solar flaring, you're doing that all the time, but any solar flaring is going to cause that electron beam, that concentrated electron beam, to be hitting the spacecraft at all times. That's why, for example, on the SOHO satellite, you will see the electron count go down, but what's really going on is the electron count is going off the charts. The spacecraft is charging, and there's a lot of X-ray activity, and you can see it on the X-ray chart. The X-rays are going up, and that's one thing that NASA does not understand. But to answer your question, there's a recent medical report on going through the Van Allen belts, and what they do is they take the ambient radiation of space, and they use that as if that's what it were in the Van Allen belts, but that's not what's happening. That electrical current of charged particles is going to concentrate on that spacecraft, discharging that region, and the actual count that they give is based on their estimates. It's not based on a measurement. And a person that was instrumental in discovering the Van Allen belts recently went on record as saying, you cannot get a person through the Van Allen belts.
Thanks.
It's a complex topic. Yes, go ahead.
Good morning.
1 minute, so.
Yes, I'd like your views on two comments.
Stand up to the microphone, please.
I'd like your views on two comments regarding, you asserted that we didn't go to the moon. Comment number one, can you explain about the helium-3 that the Apollo astronauts were purported to bring back, and it was extracted out of the moon rocks, given that there's only a minute quantity of helium-3 on Earth? And number two, I have in my possession fax copies of two slides and slide numbers and coordinates of pictures taken by Apollo 10 and Apollo 11, the crew of blue objects on the moon. These slides were given to several people, including the Plasma Physics Department in Australia. Could you care to comment on that, seeing as you said that we didn't go to the moon?
Well, there's many ways to do the things without people that you're talking about. For example, the prism they left on the moon does not require any kind of precise positioning. So as far as gathering rocks or bringing things back, all of that can be done automatically, and the Russians were doing that very early in the space race. There's a lot of questions. And I think the first thing we have to do is swing those big telescopes up there, and let's see if they went or not, because the landing sites are all in plain view here. We have the means to look at them, and I'd like this question answered in a scientific manner. I know there's a problem with going through the Van Allen belts. NASA has a huge effort. Sean O'Keefe's opening statement when he was interviewed, when he was inducted as head of NASA, he was asked, what is your primary, most important goal as the new leader of NASA? He said, to learn how to get through the Van Allen belts. So this is a huge question. I would like it answered as much as you do, and I think there's a scientific way to do it, and I think it would be something that has to be overseen by people who are at least neutral and not allow NASA to oversee their own investigation, so to speak. But as far as the specifics that you're talking about, I don't know. I can't answer those questions right now, other than let's get down to the basics. Did they go? I think NASA should admit what happened. I don't think anybody has real records of it anymore. Most of the records from the Apollo program have been destroyed. Why would you destroy a national treasure like that? All of the plans, all of the diagrams for the lunar lander, all of that have been destroyed.
Can I ask, where did they get the helium-3 from then?
Well, once again, you can, well, helium-3 you can build in a reactor. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying there are other possible explanations. And I see these, I get asked questions like this all the time, or questions about how the lunar rover reacted as it sat on the lunar surface. I see these as all extraneous issues. Let's go see if they went. Let's get the very simple mechanism out there. Let's get those big telescopes pointed up there under neutral, what would you call it, control, and let's see if they went. And it's very simple. That would end the discussion of what, and then all those questions would be the topic of many conversations in the future.
I wanted to ask you.
We're actually out of time, so we're on borrowed time here.
Okay. I wanted
One
to
more
ask you
question.
about the moon and the effects of the moon being a hollowed-out spaceship that was brought here how many thousands and thousands of years ago. And also, do you know about Themis and Deimos, if they're still around? I heard they disappeared.
I get asked these questions a lot, and
the asteroid belt around Mars and Jupiter, what do you think that was? Was it the planet Maldek or whatever?
that's a very difficult one to prove. If there was a planet there, to retro-calculate orbits back to a particular object. The hollow moon, it appears to be a solid object. Gravitationally, it acts like a solid object. There again, in Themis and Deimos, I am not personally aware that they're there or not there. I do very little big-scale astronomy observation myself, but.
Okay, I could not omit myself. I'm from Brazil. I'm the president in Brasilia, Brazil, of the National Space Society. And let me tell you something. I don't agree with you when you say we did not go to the moon. Let me tell you why.
Okay.
I know Neil Armstrong. I know Buzz Aldrin very well. And they are men with a lot of dignity. And I'm very sure they would not agree to be part of a conspiracy. So they did go to the moon for sure.
Well, thank you. And as a scientist, what I would say is let's not argue about it. Let's go prove it one way or the other in the scientific manner and get those telescopes up there to see who's right. And I'm not, if we went to the moon, that would be wonderful. But let's prove it in a scientific manner, and then you and I do not have to get angry at each other.
Do you think Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would agree to be part of a conspiracy? I know them very well. They have got a lot of dignity, I can assure you.
Sure. No, I understand that.
Thank you.
But science is not about personal emotions or concepts or ideas. It's about proving with observation. And that's why I consider myself a scientist. Let's look at it observationally and determine if it happened with neutral parties in charge of those telescopes. Period. Bob?
Okay, so there you have it. I hope you like this presentation. And once again, I think it's very important that you see these historically important videos. And it really goes into a lot of good science, which is completely relevant today. And it also gives you the information that I was giving literally 25 years ago, 21 years ago in this case. And of course, this information came from my theoretical work that was at that point many decades old, going back to the late 1970s when I was at Cornell. So with that in mind, we'll talk to you next week.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern,